thank you all so much for coming to Victor or Victim, Strategies for Avoiding an InfoSec Cold War. I assume that you are here, chances are because this might be something you're going through. And we'll actually expound on what we mean by an InfoSec Cold War, but it's interesting to have Stuart on stage, maybe on stage with him, because you're looking at a professional red teamer and a professional blue teamer. And this talk was a whole lot of fun to put together because it was interesting to try and dissect some of the reasons why why there might be friction in InfoSec, especially if you're internal, or if you have an internal red team, an internal blue team, or if you are an internal blue team and you are bringing in somebody like TrustedSec, that would be me, outside to do pen tests and things like that. There can be strife, there can be friction, especially when things don't go right. And that can breed discontent and some resentment and things like that. And that's really what this talk is about, because if we can resolve some differences, then we can really move things forward. We can move your organization forward. We can move security forward. So my name is Jason Lang. I'm a senior security consultant with TrustedSec. I go by Curious Jack on Twitter. And next to me is got him.
It sounded so great. I was like, wow. Front row. Stuart McIntosh with American Family Insurance. I'm actually a threat intel analyst with them, have been for a few years, and my handle's Contra Blue Team. So just kicking it off, I kind of like this quote because this is the protagonist and antagonist kind of push and pull or explaining a story, or you need both to really move something forward. You need that ebb and flow. So for this talk, come on, I told you, your clickers aren't good.
It's okay, I think so.
Yeah, go.
Okay, great.
Okay, so goals for this talk. Just up front, one of the things we want to do is talk about what we view as some of the issues with friction and what are some ways that we found to work together. Believe it or not, Jason and I have had disagreements. Hey, go figure. And even in our approaches to our work, or what should offense have to do or defense. So what are some of the ways that we've kind of worked through some of that, and what are tools you can take? Another one is kind of breaking apart. There's a lot of one-liners in here on both sides, kind of dinging each other. So let's get them out in the open. Let's talk about them. And then finally, what are some ways that security programs, whether you're an external consultant or you're an internal program, what are some ways that we can actually, now understanding this, start moving forward and actually making some positive change? Yeah. So a lot of this boils down to just it's work. So you got to work together. It's not just going to solve itself. So let's step up and see what we can do. So what do we mean by a Cold War? So the really big point here that we're talking about is it's not totally just. Yeah, can you point? Your touchpad doesn't work great.
That's very well fun. Keep going.
So there's a lot of pride in what we do on both sides, whether you're doing offense or defense, red, blue. There's just a lot of pride, and unfortunately, sometimes that pride can just lock us up against getting criticism or what we view as criticism, even though it's just a help. So how do we get past some of that? Another one is grass is greener. Man, I wish I could design my own schedule. I don't have to do projects. I don't have to do email. So there's always this, hey, but your job's better, and I'm a little envious of it. I think there's a little bit on both sides, but it's definitely...
It's only blue to red.
Oh, yeah. There it is. Thanks. And then... And then we get the escalation. So then we just get this like, no, I'm better. Or no, my role's better or more important or more impactful. So, and then all of this kind of weighs into something that I think at best this friction, this back and forth is definitely slowing down the rate of security improvements. But at worst, this total breakdown is going to cause significant security issues, because if we can't resolve this, I know my management team, this is not their forte, and so it's just going to make things fall apart. Oh, yes. There's a note even about it. Yeah. So what do I mean about some of this? We had a blind pen test They told us kind of a time frame, and the whole point of it was to kind of blindly test our security defenses. And so the pen tester finally triggered enough of an alert that we got on board, and we started shutting down, shunning their outside IP. I mean, the standard IR practices. And so then, now that we knew about them, now comes the twice-a-day daily phone calls, which is great because he said, yeah, but you didn't catch me scanning your IP range on the outside. Everyone does that. I'm sure it's in the logs, but yep. But the problem was, every day he said he couldn't pen test because we shunned his IP, and he wanted us to remove it from, I think we have over 30 firewalls. He wants it removed from all of them so that he can resume testing. And I said, just pick a new IP. And he said, no, I can't. Like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I'm testing from my house. I ended up shunning his home IP, and he didn't know how to rotate it. Like, just unplug it. So he got really, anyway. So the net result of this is that I did not have a very functional relationship with him as a tester. And at the end, it was just kind of a numb test. It was kind of like, it didn't leave either side feeling happy. Auditors felt, our audit group felt good because, hey, we're good. Of course. So anyway, I diverge. In all of this, I mentioned the twice-a-day calls. These, I think a lot of, and Jason will talk a little bit about this. From a blue team, I hate the scopes. Yep, I hate the scoping because I have to spend hours with people who don't understand these things to craft them. I don't like that. I also don't like that now I'm going to have to basically babysit a bunch of, hey, what did that mean? Hey, when he said that on the phone, what's that? What's that? So while there may be twice-a-day phone calls or daily statuses, it's actually my entire day defining like what these different terms mean to inside groups.
This is actually also red team's pain as well. We have to deal with the exact same thing. Now, obviously, this is a slight exaggeration on a real statement of work or the real rules of engagement, but there's definitely a whole lot of frustration as a red teamer when something like this comes into play and you have to look at a scope and rules of engagement that you look at this organization, you can tell, you just know that we're simply checking a box. This is part of an audit. This is part of like a PCI pen test or something like that. And that is super frustrating as a red teamer. So actually, before we go any further, who here is red team? And who's blue team? All right. Okay.
Hey, yeah.
This is going to be interesting. Okay. So, but before we talk about, really diving into the Cold War, let's actually, I think it's time that we air some of the elephants that are in the room. And these are going to be in the room. Like if you put red team and you put blue team in the same meeting room, and they start talking back and forth about findings or, things like that, there are some, shall we say, we'll just call them grievances that really should be aired and brought to light. And I'm going to bring them to light for you. Because generally speaking, a lot of people don't talk about this. Or if you're red team, you talk about them with each other. And if you're blue team, you talk about them with each other. But it never crosses the aisle. And I think in order to break down some of this stuff, we need to just kind of put this out in the open and just get everybody nodding their heads because these are all absolutely true. So we're going to do an airing of grievances. I'm going to start with the red team grievances. All right. So here it is. Red team grievance number 1. Red team breaks things. Blue team fixes them. Red team, you understand? You feel this pain right here? All right. This, if I could burn one popular InfoSec phrase, it would be this. And by burn, I mean like dig a hole and put it into the ground and then light it on fire and then bury it. Okay. I have heard this phrase over and over and over again. And so here's the thing. As a red team, as a professional red team, this is what I do for a living. If I get into somebody's network and I start breaking stuff, doing it wrong. Doing it all wrong. All right, I was talking with a blue teamer friend of mine. We were having breakfast the other day, and I said, "Hey, what really pisses you off about the red team?" And he's like, "Oh," and here we go. I knew I was in for something. He's like, "We had this firm in, and we had this firm in, and we had this firm in, and this firm just started like taking servers down." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, like they started running stuff. They weren't proofing out their exploits. They weren't doing anything in the test environment. They were literally just DB auto-poning the entire network, and stuff goes offline. And I'm like. No, that's not the right way of doing things. People who do that are wrong. And so as a red teamer, like I said, my job is not to break anything. If I'm on a lengthy engagement, you shouldn't be seeing me. If you do see me, that's great. That means you have either I made a mistake or you have some outstanding detections in place and you caught me and my stealth was not stealthy enough. However, stuff should not be going offline. All right. Number 2, was this you? How many of you red teamers have gotten an email, or shall I say, because you don't even know what I'm going to say? Hands go up. You're like, oh man, what's this like crazy thing just happened, and we think we're hacked. However, we know there's a pen test, so was it you? And the answer is no. No, it's not. Why? Because I'm being stealthy, and I'm not taking your stuff offline. So in fact, this happened to me on a test. I would say not too long ago. I was doing. I don't exactly remember what the test was that I was doing, but I got a very, very urgent email from my client saying we're seeing all this weird traffic come into our website, and it was an external test. All right, so yes, that possibly could have been me, and I understand. And so I get this email comes in. He's like, he's on fire. He's so worked up because he thinks that they're getting hacked, and he's like, this was you, right? And I looked at the IP, and I'm like. And I went over to Google, and I Googled the IP, and I'm like, that's China. It's not me. And so then his hair really went on fire, and he freaked out, and it kind of vanished for a little bit while they put that fire out. So the answer is no. It absolutely was not me. Unless it was a mainframe, then yes, it probably was me. Cal tipped that right over with Nmap. And the last grievance that just gets under my skin, and probably gets under your skin if you're a red teamer, 4 words that no red teamer ever wants to see. It's out of scope. Right? And as a red teamer, you know this right away. If you get scoped into a corner, all right, and you look at this environment, and you start looking around and you see like 2003 servers or 2008 servers, and then the client comes back, they're like, no, we know there's problems, but we're not worried about that. You can only attack this, and only on port 10,001. You're like, all right, fine. And so what do you do? You're forced to write a report that basically just says, okay, you're absolutely secure. There's no problems here. Your environment is fine. In the back of your mind, you know you can get domain admin like 10 different ways, but you're not allowed to say that. And that's frustrating as a red teamer because that means that the value of the engagement, like thousands of dollars, just flush it down the toilet, right? Because that engagement is now worthless. But problem is you can't necessarily come out and say that. And those are problems. Those are things that irritates us as a red team. However, I'm not the only one with grievances. Other people have grievances. For example, the blue team.
Yeah. Okay. Let's level it out a little bit. So, after we pay money for people to have fun on something we have to take care of, they're handed a list of, here's how you can be better, or here's how you suck. It depends on how good the firm is. But this like, drop everything and here's how bad you are. Oh, man. It's terrible, especially if we don't like partner with the firm. They just literally drop things off. We had a pen test. I totally spaced about this until now. We had a pen test. They came back. They said, "Oh, you're vulnerable to MSO8 by 30,000 machines." And I was like, "What? How did you get this?" Well, we checked AD and there's an OS stamp, and that OS is vulnerable. None of those machines are online. They're just old machine accounts that haven't been removed, and they're like. Well, it's still critical. It could be. And I said, okay, pick 1,000. Like, that's too many. And I was like, okay, pick 10 and prove it. They're like, they're not online. Yeah, that's my point.
I'm pretty sure I said it was only 20,000. Just saying.
Another one. Oh, man, these just grate on me. I can't believe you didn't detect this. It's so simple. No, like, in an environment like ours, there's so many moving pieces. There's so many different things hitting us. The idea of simple is, explain it in a meeting. But anyway. And then the even worse, I can't believe you didn't block it. And it's like, yeah, again, I have all these vendors, I have all these people, I have all these projects. And at the end of the day, they come by with a budget and they're like, oh yeah, we have to cut the budget in half. What? But we got money for you guys, so don't worry. We'll keep finding what's wrong. And so this all kind of like, all this is kind of feeding back to, it's not about you, you just thought it's about you. I think a lot of where we're going with this is that we internalize and personalize a lot of these exchanges because we're so passionate about what we do. So I think when we see findings on a report, here, the MSO8, I got angry with them because I thought they were lazy. I thought this was like, come on. And that may be, but why did I react that way? So one of the things that we kind of see is on the blue side, let's talk about some overt blue team ego. Oh my God, they didn't even get DA. So we used to hear so much about, oh, it's so easy, every place. We just get DA by launch, and then we just kick our feet up and play around. So we definitely kind of bash on if anyone can't get DA, that for some reason that's like the magical you're secure. But meanwhile, they took everything else. And then another one, we definitely say, yeah, we don't expect you to get very far. We're secure. I don't know if you know, but we're secure. And then when they tell us we're not secure, just blatantly yelling at them and saying, no way, nope, you're wrong, that's not us. So some of the covert ways of kind of feeding this in as well is this like rebuttaling in the meetings about like, no, we would have stopped you. Or targeting testers. Just this all out like, oh no, we'll be better. What's your IP? And then it's like, well, see, we're secure. And all we did is just basically eliminate the whole value of a test in one move. And then, why didn't they follow the rules? I love this one. You can just throw a flag on any test and be like, yeah, but they didn't follow the engagement rules, so just throw them out. Just throw out the results. It's okay. See, a good clicker.
Red team doesn't have ego. The slide is intentionally left blank. Overt ego, let's talk about it, red team. So from one red teamer to another, let's talk about your ego and my ego, because these are all true and these are probably going to hit close to home. Just like Stuart said, except it's the opposite. Oh my God, I got DA in an hour, right? You fire up responder, you get DA by lunch on Monday, and you just, you walk off thinking you're the shiz, and you get yourself a cup of coffee, and the report basically writes itself, right? So you think you are all that. That's what we're talking about, right? Number two, one factor on their VPN with fall 2018. Yeah. You walk away, once again, you think you're all that. Well, here's the problem. Here's what you don't realize. You don't realize that there's actually a project that's been on the books in that environment for a solid year, and they're going through hassle after hassle, and they're trying out different products, and nothing's working. Well, on one hand, yes, they are insecure in that window. On the other hand, that doesn't mean you just kind of rub their face in. And even though, I get it, that's fun. All right. Number three, and that's when they said, but we have DLP. There's no ego at all in these statements. I don't know where these came from. And these are overt ways. These are ways which we openly display ego. And by the way, I know they're funny, but they absolutely rub people the wrong way. Especially if you're talking to, who knew, right? Especially if you're talking to a customer. If these are coming out of your mouth, just kind of like delete your account and, go become like a banker or something like that. But covert ego. And I think covert ego is much more insidious. Overt ego, everyone knows you're just a jackass. That's like, you kind of put it on display, right? Covert ego, I have to figure you out for a second. I have to wait for you to stick your foot in your mouth a few more times before I figure out your level of ego. Okay, but that comes out in ways where it's like, you know what? Yeah, I have this really, really awesome vector that I use to compromise you, and I give you the really high level, right? I'm not going to give you the specifics, because specifics is my secret sauce. And I don't necessarily need to tell people about that. So I'm just gonna, I'll tell you, yeah, I got in through like some Outlook persistence. And you use kind of this really high level language, and it doesn't help them. It doesn't help them at all, right? And that's your job. Your job is to generate remediation work. Your job is to absolutely disclose TDPs to your client, okay? Because they are paying you to help them fix stuff. Now, I know this is obvious. Use a red teamer, all right? However, it's important that these particular things get called out, because we're setting up the stage for moving forward. And if people can't acknowledge their own ego in the room, then that's when, I think your value as a tester just kind of goes down. So, anyways. What number am I on? 5? Report delivery one-upping. Stuart had talked about this earlier, but this is really when tempers flare on both sides. Especially if you're dealing with someone who thinks that this is their baby. Okay, you show them your baby's ugly. Sorry, but it's ugly. All right, they get up, they get mad, they leave the room. Okay, now how you go about doing that is where that's where your value is truly demonstrated, in my opinion. If you can convince someone that, listen, there are some serious problems in your environment, and here are some legitimate ways to fix them, and they actually smile, shake your hand, leave, and then bring you back later, you've done your job well. Okay. However, if they come back and they try and one up you, you're like, well, yeah, but we could have caught you here and here. Like, well, actually, you couldn't, because I was using the latest, greatest hacker toolkits that were dropped at Derbycon. and my macros are flaming hot, and there's no way that you would have caught me. And this ego one-upping game takes place, and that's frustrating. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about an InfoSec cold war. When blue team really just doesn't like the red team. They don't like dealing with you. Red team, you don't really like dealing with them. You think all the users are dumb. You don't want to work with organizations. You get kind of cynical because you're like, everyone's security sucks. And so, this ego mentality creeps in and makes you cynical. And that's a problem because that cynicism carries into every engagement that you're a part of. Okay? And lastly, going after your point of contact, I get it. It's actually a lot of fun. But seriously don't. It's really just a bad idea. Okay, and so that's the problem, like I said, with some of the stuff is that it's contagious. This is actually something that Stuart and I came up with. Ego is like a rotting piece of fruit. It's not content to be rotten. It must rot everything around it. And when you are that person, when you bring your ego into the room and people kind of begin to recognize you that way, they start to not like you. The problem is that those mentalities are contagious. And you kind of infect people because their guard goes up and they start one-upping you, and this game just continues, and it really, really does devalue the engagement that's happening. Okay? So, are you trying to, I think the material question is, what, as red teamers in particular, are we trying to do? And this goes for blue team as well. Are you trying to win, or are you trying to protect? I understand winning. I get that mentality. I really do. However, as red teamers, that's not our goal. And that shouldn't be our goal. Now, granted, like I said, I get it. You want to get shells. I understand shells. Right? Who doesn't love shells? Like crack. Legalized crack, right? But there's a difference between winning and protecting, okay? Winning is one thing, protecting is another. Winning is the means to the end. Protection is the end. Okay? And so understand that the goal is to be protecting your clients. And so from the offensive goal is showing what can actually happen, bringing clarity to an organization's defensive biases, because every organization thinks that they are secure in certain ways, and your job is to effectively lay that bare out in the open and say, well, you thought you were secure here. However, the truth is that there are some insecurities here, here, and here. And demonstrating that is fundamentally where the value is, and demonstrating it well and in such a manner that the client, once again, thanks you and brings you back is one of the principal goals of doing this right. As far as the defensive goal.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Defense goal, and this is where, for a long time, we thought, it's just the opposite of offense. It's actually not. It's a little bit different, which is what we're trying to do is, in that reality and clarity that the offense is trying to bring to the table, we have to connect that with, okay, now what does the company do? How do we help focus them as far as people or tools or money to actually start closing what offense teams are finding? So I think it's this subtle shift of, no, we're not sparring partners, but rather this is our environment. They're helping us tell us that our environment's off in these places and how to get better. And our job is to help connect what they're doing into the machine of the company and saying, okay, this is how best to get that process through. And yeah, okay. So we talk a lot about this ego, and we kind of talk about, I think, after thinking a lot about this, what we want to do is kind of distill this down into, okay, here's some steps, here's some things that we can do. And I think you hear us say ego, you hear us throw these things up, and I think it can be taken as a way of that this is us saying, you guys, or not, well, clearly not this room, every other room, that's what they're doing. And really what we're meaning is that it's about you. That's the only thing to change here is your approach, your ego, what's going on with you. And I think from the blue side, remembering that this is about improving, not winning. I think it's really easy that a report is very easy to see as a scorecard. Like, okay, okay, you may have won that one, but we're going to win the next. And I think competition is healthy, but not when it starts creeping in to being the net effect. What we really want to do is keep using that to improve.
As far as ego suppression on the red team side, I remember sitting in front of this slide for a long time, thinking about the best way to kind of distill this down and saying, it's easy to say things like it's not about you, and that's 100% true. The question is, how as a red teamer do you do that when your job is fundamentally to compromise, to affect compromise, to pretend to be an adversary? I imagine our adversaries have egos, so how far are we supposed to emulate? And this is really what it came down to, at least for me. So your mileage is going to vary with this statement, but this is something that I latched onto that I thought was meaningful, and that is celebrate the exploit, not the vulnerability. And what I mean by that is when you're sitting there, you launch a payload and you get back shell, right? I don't know about you, but I do a happy dance. And I mean, I can't dance, but in my mind, I'm like vanilla icing all over the stage of my mind. All right, like super happy. Okay, and that's fine. That's fine because that, like I said, it's addictive. Like everyone wants that. However, when that happens, I'm not necessarily celebrating the fact that my client is insecure. I'm celebrating the fact that all my hard work paid off. And there's a difference in mentality between celebrating your accomplishment versus celebrating the misfortune of the people that you just stepped on to get there. And so when I say celebrate the exploit, I'm talking about if you put a lot of hard work into something and it turns out and it works well, that's great, fine, celebrate it. However, don't celebrate the misfortune of others. And generally speaking, the others in that statement is your client. So yes, there is vulnerability and insecurity in the environment that you just tested. However, that is not what you should be celebrating. And that is what those statements previously where it's like, oh yeah, we got D in an hour. That's what you're celebrating. You're celebrating the fact that, there's still LM&R, floating around their network and you just capitalized on that. And that's fundamentally different than simply enjoying the fruits of your own labor. So that would be my encouragement to you, Red Team. Do not revel in the fact that your client is still using Fall 2018 all over the network. They might be doing that because their users are simply uneducated. And that's something that you can help correct. So take that step and, go the extra mile in that case and put your ego on the shelf. All right. And there's a quote that I really, really love. And Stuart and I talked about this, putting the slide up there, but that is really assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. And it doesn't matter who you're listening to. It could be listening to somebody that you meet in the hallway, somebody that, meet a customer, you meet a stranger, it doesn't matter, but assume that the person you're listening to knows something you don't. And this was brought home to me personally, when I taught a class for the first time at Derbycon a couple of days ago. You go in there, you go into the classroom environment, you think you know X, Y, and Z, and then stuff stops working, and your students start telling you how to fix it. And then your students start telling you, oh, yeah, this is great. However, you could have done this and this and this, and I'm like, starting to take notes. I'm like, I'm sorry, what was that? Could you say that again? And when that happens, it could be really, really easy for the ego to get inflamed. Like, wait a second, I'm the teacher, sit down, junior. Okay? But that's not true. I'm sitting in a room full of my peers, and generally speaking, people who know way more than I do, probably about what I'm talking about, which is humbling. To bring this home, one of my favorite quotes about humility, kind of being in that situation, comes from C.S. Lewis, and he said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I really appreciated that. And in moments like that, when your ego is tempted to get inflamed, put your ego on the shelf and think of yourself less. So that was number one, deal with your own ego. Once you deal with your own ego, once that stuff is put out of the way, then you can move on to step two, and that is, we call this adopting a unified trajectory.
Nice Gartner slide.
You like that? You like that? I think you came up with that because I'm a red team. So, we've worked together for a really, really long time. So the problems, as far as the trajectory and where we go as an organization, how we work together as Blue and Red, I think, and in talking with Stuart, we agreed on this, and in talking with others, we pulled a lot of Blue and Red teamers to come to these conclusions. There is a misalignment of expectations fundamentally across the board between Blue and Red. And that misalignment does a few things in the background that I don't think people necessarily pay attention to, but they feel the effects of. For example, it ensures the mediocrity of security. If Blue Team thinks we should be going one direction, and Red Team's like, no, wait a second, Fall 2018, one-factor VPN, then heads start butting. All right, and there's that misalignment creates division and it creates friction when that friction can be unnecessary because we could have agreed on the trajectory to begin with, especially after we put our ego on the shelf. And number two, it causes an ineffective investment in resources. We start wasting our time. We start wasting our money. You start coming to me with a PCI pen test where I can test one system. I'm like, sorry, you're wasting your money. All right, I understand. I get it. You have to do it because of PCI. However, let's minimize the focus over here and maximize the focus over here where we know you're vulnerable. All right, and it creates confusion, disagreement about how to improve due to our own biases. We each think we know the right way for company X to proceed, whether you work for that company or whether you are a consultant for that company. We each think we know what is in the best interest of that company. So one thing that we did, actually, inspirational slide, not a daily increase but a daily decrease, hack away the inessentials. So what we did is we did just that. We tried to boil down what we consider to be the path to maturity, both on the red side and the blue side. Now, once again, your mileage is going to vary with this. And if in your organization, you're going to take what we put up on the screen and you're going to internalize it to your own organization, that's just fine. Okay, however, from my standpoint, when I get this question all the time from my customers. Okay, we've done an external test. What do we do now? Or we've done an internal test. What do we do now? Or we've done 3 internal tests. What do we do now? And I really do think that organizations generally can outgrow certain phases of offensive engagements. I think you can move past certain things. Once you get the basics down, you don't necessarily need to be doing that. You don't need to be doing external quarterlies. Maybe you do for compliance reasons, but that's different than growing as an organization. So from an offensive standpoint, if you are brand new to security and you're brand new to InfoSec and you're like, okay, I've just inherited this hot mess of MSO 8067s, what do? Here's what we would recommend. All right, number 1, you start with a vulnerability scan. You like literally get an SS, plug it in, put it in your environment, run it once a week, and start fixing stuff. Okay, you don't need to be doing a bunch of pen testing. This is not the point to be running, MITRE attack framework, when really there are basics that you should be focusing on. And that first basic is just simply start cleaning up the criticals in your environment. Once you clean up the criticals, time to move on. Time to get an external pen test. And oh, by the way, these are offensive engagements, not necessarily audits. If you're an auditor, this is going to look different for you. Okay, but then move on to external pen tests. All right, now it's like let's focus on what are my significant vulnerabilities on the perimeter. How can people get in? And don't necessarily just focus on running Nessus on the perimeter. I wouldn't recommend that. A good pen tester is going to go beyond that and actually go into some of the new methods of gaining remote code execution in your environment. They're going to explore Link and Skype and basically all things Microsoft in your environment to see how they can get in. Okay, so we're stepping out of vulnerability scan, but you're still doing that. Number 3, you move to an internal pen test. All right, most companies, the vast majority of companies that I test that do an internal for the first time, it's like the perimeter is like this 10-foot wall that's a mile high and several feet deep, but inside it's like squishy middle. It's like a donut, right? Inside there's that tasty, jelly filling, right? And that's where all my shells are. That's where DA is. And so, once you have done several externals and you move to an internal, now you start fixing that stuff. All right, okay, then this is probably where a lot of people are. They've been doing all this stuff for years. This is old offensive stuff. You start getting into new offensive stuff. I mean, with the flash new purple teams. Right now, we start moving into things like doing detections and actually improving where your detections are based on red team methodology. So I come in there, I sit down, I start running attacks. We start writing detections together. Now, all of a sudden, you can develop meaningful detections based on the logs that you're aggregating. That's what a purple team is. Once you're beyond that, now you're starting to get a more stealthy stuff. Now is the time to focus on the attack framework. Now is the time to actually start breaking down very, very specific pieces of tradecraft and mining your logs. And then that leads to obviously non-scope long-term engagements. We have some customers that are they're doing engagements that are simply just year-round. They don't know when the attack is coming, but it's coming. And these are customers who are very, very mature in their security processes. They already have all these logs. They already know what to look for. They've been through several purple teams. This is kind of the stepping stone as we see it as far as offensive testing goes.
So, excuse me, let's take a look from the blue side, the defense side. And it's the same kind of cadence of, okay, start with the essentials, start with the fundamentals. If you're not doing patch management, a red team engagement, probably not going to get the most value out of it. So really at the base, we talk about patch management. And Jason touched on some of these, and you start going to that perimeter again. Network controls, start looking at your endpoints as far as elevated access, privileged accounts. Then start actually strengthening your endpoints, whether you pick an EDR or next-gen whatever on the endpoint, go for it. And then you start talking about how do I collect intel, how do I collect information off all these systems that I put in, and start making sense of it, leading into this alerting and your response to alerts. So it all just kind of keeps circling on itself and ultimately ending in threat hunting, or that's where we put it, because if you don't have the pieces below and you just say, oh, we're going to threat hunt in this environment, you're going to end up going back to the bottom and rebuilding all the missing pieces. So I think it's important to kind of have this path, this curve, to try to figure out, okay, where are we and where do we need to be? And one of the things that's interesting is that we started overlaying these and saying, well, if that's yours in offense and this is mine on defense, maybe there's some similarities here. And when you overlay them and you start looking, they actually are kind of the cadence, the ebb and flow between them. And you shouldn't jump on either side. It's incremental improvements on both.
And this is one of the areas where we would, if someone came to me and said, hey, Jason, we want a red team, because red team is the hotness right now. We want a red team. I'd say, okay, do you have centralized logging? No. Okay. I immediately know you're probably not ready for a red team. Your money would be better spent on something like an internal pen test. Your money would be better spent on something like a purple team or 2 or 3 after you get those logs aggregated. Once you have meaningful detections written, okay, now it's time to move into something that involves a little more stealth. And so this is kind of our attempt to help guide people, especially if they don't necessarily know what to do next or how to mature their program as it pertains to offensive and defensive engagements. However, there comes a point in this chart when I stop being a red teamer and he stops being a blue teamer, and we actually switch. And in order to actually progress my career and for him to progress his career further, we have to start knowing a lot about what each other does. And that happens right about here. So in this moment, when you step out of an internal pen test, and you're done with all that, right? You've had internal pen tests for years. You got everything on the lockdown. And now it's time to start, you hear threat hunting, and you hear attack, and you hear red team, and you're like, okay, I want to start reaching for that. In order to be effective at that, even as a professional, I need to know what your detections are in order for me to give you the best experience possible. I need to know where your detections are, what you're detecting, what you're not detecting, and that is fundamentally the goal of that internal red team, is to try and flesh that out and find where the weak spots are. In order for him to write good detections, he needs to know what my methodology is. He needs to know what tools I'm going to run. He needs to know the latest TTPs that I'm going to use. And that is where we move into the next phase of what we're trying to describe, which is you put your own ego on the shelf, and then you start agreeing on how to move forward in terms of what the next thing to do is, and now what happens? What happens if you've done those next things, and you're like, okay, I got threat hunting on the lockdown. I'm doing 12-month engagements. What happens beyond that? And that's kind of when you're at, shall I say, the crest of the wave, so to speak, in terms of how you can best move the security of your organization forward. How do you get on the cutting edge? And the way that we think to do this is developing trusted partnerships. And this is not some sort of salesy vendor nonsense. I had a hard time writing these 3 words because it sounds like something a vendor would say. So what do I mean by developing trusted partnerships? What we're talking about, and Stuart and I were going over this yesterday, and we settled on this particular word, and that is trading our durabilities. What does that mean? If I come up with a TTP, or I start researching TTP and I find it, and it's awesome, and I know that this is going to be valuable for a long time. Maybe Microsoft came back and said, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Awesome. I know it's going to work for a long time. Or maybe Stuart writes a detection, and his detection catches all flavors of past the hash, past, present, and future. Okay? We can use the word durable to describe that. My TTP is very durable. His detection is very durable. And so when we talk about trading our durabilities, that is how you advance to the next degree of partnership, and you have to do that with a trusted person. You can't do that on Twitter. Ooh, okay. You can't do that on Twitter. Everyone kind of puckered when I said that. Everyone relax. All right? As fun as it is to drop the new hotness on Twitter, I get it. Okay? However, in order for my flashy new sexy thing to be truly valuable, I have to know what the detections and the mechanisms that a defender would put in place to block it are. Then I can make my new tradecraft durable. And once I have that durable tradecraft, I can share it with someone that I trust, who's not just going to go reveal it to vendor X and just going to get rolled out. Okay, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if the philanthropy is your goal. So, anyways, I'm not going to go too far into that. It's again not just sales partnership. This goes far beyond business. I'm talking about the free trade and of attack, detect ideas, craft, and methodology. And this includes specifics. Again, TTPs, I'm telling you things I've already told you. Emerging ideas, and truly for the betterment of each other's craft. This is not quid pro quo. Stuart said this, and we were talking about this yesterday. He said, this doesn't mean that if you give me something, I have to give you something. This is the true sharing of TTPs and detections. And how does that look? Well, it looks like this. Great something Stuart said, the more durable the technique, the detection, the more valuable the share is. And that's true. And here's what a current engagement, man, I have so many bullets here. This does not compromise the business of security. This will probably get me in trouble if I talk about this too much, but let's just say that we both understand that there's a monetary value that comes into security. And if my job as a red teamer is to provide remediation work, and if everything gets dropped that I'm working on, well, if it all gets burned, then my fear as a red teamer is that my value that I'm going to be providing to a customer goes down. And Stuart countered that. He said, no, that's not true at all. He said, you might think that. However, if we trust each other, and I know that you have the best interests of my organization in mind, I would be willing to pay for your research. And not necessarily just wait for it to hit Twitter. I would be willing to pay for that cutting edge stuff. And as a red teamer, that means a lot, because that means the business aspect is solved. All right? Running out of time. So this is what a current relationship looks like. All right? You have a client, on the blue team side, you're paying attention to tweets, you're paying attention to talks. If you hire us, we got an NDA. It's great. It's wonderful. We got a warm fuzzy. Okay. However, on the red team side, maybe you tell me what your products are, or if we're on the kickoff call and I social engineer and you start telling me about CrowdStrike and stuff like that. That's great. Okay. And that's where things stop. I deliver the report, you start writing detections, and that's where it's over. However, that trusted partnership that we're talking about looks a little more like this. And this is when we actually bridge the gap into a meaningful exchange of ideas, a meaningful exchange of tradecraft, where blue team can be at the crest of that wave, and so can red team, because like I said, you have to be part blue, you have to be part red in order to advance your career next. And when we're sharing those things, and I'm talking about emerging things, that is when you can take things to the next level. All right, so red teamers' top 3 goals for the blue team. Number 1, realize that we are partners to be relied on, not opponents to be fought. If you're trying to win the pen test, you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry, as a blue teamer, you're doing it wrong. You should not be trying to win the pen test in that moment. If I get in through SSL VPN and you do something to disable SSL VPN, that's not a good idea. All right, because now I'm back to square one. Now I'm just wasting time. Now I'm wasting money. All right. Number 2, give real weight to the findings. We didn't write them to be jerks. I'm not writing findings for my health. All right. I'm writing findings because they are legitimate problems. And if that just gets kind of shelved, well, I mean, okay, it's your money. Just give it to me and I'll put it to better use. And number 3, help us help you. We kind of obvious, but we really are there to be your partner, not necessarily your adversary or your opponent or your enemy. All right, on the blue team side. So
blue team, help us move our own program forward instead of belittling, criticizing. Really, how can you bring your perspective or the findings of the work that you do and really apply them and fit them into how we can move our programs forward? And again, back to experience partnership, you see things in other customers that may be a little bit different from us, and you could help give us that advice or that guidance on what we should be looking at or what's happening out in the space. And then finally, when we say don't brute force until lockout, please don't brute force until lockout.
It's an accident.
And then finally, don't vuln scan our mainframe. It just messes against the mainframe. It's not good. So real quick, Jason and I debated this. He dry heaved about 6 times and said, you make the slide. It seems too corporate-y. So what we really want to do was actually just circle back to the 3 points, work on your own ego, find a trajectory, and then start developing some partnerships. So the thing that I kind of wanted to close with was almost 2 years ago to the day, I was coming out of a meeting at work, and I felt a little funny, strange. My back started hurting. My hands got tingly, like numb. It's kind of weird. And then I broke out into a cold sweat. And 2 coworkers absolutely insisted in taking me to the hospital. I fought them, but they won. And what happened was within an hour of that feeling and them getting me there, I actually ended up being listed as a quadriplegic and just left in the hospital for about 3 days for testing. There's about 60, 70 different tests that they ran. And after a couple of days, it ended up coming back that I had a spinal stroke, and it left me completely paralyzed. No feeling, no nothing, no movement, but I could move my head, so hey. So what it did is bringing it back to that ego. Man, that's about as much of a gut punch as you can get. That's a credentialed vuln scan, full findings, bring all your weapons. We're going to tell you the way you are. And so, and out of it, there's no place to hide, right? You can't hide that. You can't talk it away. You can't, it is what it is. And you just got a deal. Well, after they came back and told me that it was a spinal stroke, for people that know me, I like being right, I like being the smartest person, and I like my voice being heard. And for once, I'm in a position where I have to take advice from other people who have been through this stuff, who know what they're doing, whether I disagree or not. So I listened to them, and they put me on a plan. And they said, okay, here's what we can do, here's the steps, here's what we go through. And then that plan is really what it took. And kind of bringing it back, the very first morning after the diagnosis, I remember hearing this quote, victor, victim, and it just kept rattling around in my head. And I realized that, okay, every morning when I wake up, I have one question. Do I want to be a victor or a victim today? Because if I'm going to be a victor, I got to start fighting. Like, I got to follow this plan. I got to listen to people. You got to do the work. And I was waiting for the day I was going to say victim and just curl up in a ball and sleep, because I thought that'd feel great. But it just didn't come around, because I saw the more I pushed, the more other people were there for me. And then that kind of comes around to this idea of trusted partners. So if Kim and Kim could stand, yep, you're going to stand up. Don't worry, everyone's going to get a little embarrassed. Yep, these are my two coworkers who actually saved my life, took me to the hospital. So thank you. I think I've said it, but thank you. Nope, keep standing. That was the point. Now, will my coworkers and my friends who have been there for the last 2 years please stand? Joe, Scott, Sam, all of you guys. Hans, come on, man. You're around there. And then Jason, too. These were my trusted partnerships. I didn't know it at the time, but these were the people that were there for me, regardless of work. They were always there asking the question of, how can I help? They wanted to learn. And they tried to make me feel normal, which was like all I wanted. And so bringing it all back, these are my trusted partners. And I didn't realize that in doing this, how much this was kind of internalized in me. So I just want to thank you guys as well. So thank you very much for everything. And so with that, again, victor or victim, what do you want to be today? So I can't click.